This is another episode of Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington.
Way below acceptable. Way below acceptable.
On this week's episode,
they don't care about your feelings, about diversity, anything. It should be the entire spectrum of what's available to us as women. As get like all these conflicting messages about what a woman is supposed to be for.
Below acceptable.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sticky Note Conversations. I am your host and creator, Erika Washington. Today's conversation is bound to be amazing. And I say that because I get to speak with someone that I have known for a very long time and has done some amazing things in the community, and not just in Las Vegas, but also across the country. Lucy Flores is a former Nevada State Assemblywoman, also a former candidate for Congress, a lawyer, media entrepreneur, and a formerly incarcerated advocate. She's the daughter of immigrants raised in a low-income community by a single father. She also ran for, you also ran for Lieutenant Governor. I remember that. So after leaving elected office, she served as the Vice President of Public Affairs at Me Too, where she successfully developed and executed social media impact and political content strategies. And after Me Too, she launched her very own digital media brand, Luz Media, which is producing digital content that focuses on the expanding and influential U.S.-based Latina community. She's done so much more than that, but we're going to start there. And I just want to welcome Lucy Flores to Sticky Note Conversations.
Hello. Yes, thank you for having me.
How are you?
I am wonderful, and I'm very excited to be talking with you today because I miss Nevada.
As they say, home means Nevada.
That's right.
And so as far as the world can take you, there is something special about coming back on a flight to Las Vegas mixed with tourists who are whooping it up and very excited to be landing in Las Vegas, and then to get off and into an airport that is full of slot machines and slot machine noises. And it's just like, oh, okay. I think I'm home now.
We're home. Well, Battleborn, I think, is the motto of the state, and it feels very personal to me given my upbringing there and everything that I did in the state, and frankly what I continue to do. So I feel that. I feel, like Battleborn just really speaks to me, and home is Nevada. Home does mean Nevada. And, I tell folks all the time that even though I haven't been back for quite a while, it will 100%. The community, more importantly, will always be deep in my heart. So it's got a special place inside me for sure.
And so, you grew up in Las Vegas and went to school in Las Vegas. And so how do you think that shaped you as a person to grow up in a place where, one, people don't believe that there are schools and that there are children, roaming around? What was a childhood in Las Vegas like?
Yeah, well, I tell folks all the time that a childhood in Las Vegas is obviously very different. I think now it's still somewhat similar. It's frankly one of the things that made me work so hard while I was there in Las Vegas, not just growing up, but also when I got into public service, when I got elected, was that it was always like there's just so much potential in the state, and the people in the entire state, not just Las Vegas, but, the people are just they're just such hard workers, and they're there to raise families and just be in community. And they just deserve so much more than what I got and what they're currently getting, frankly. And so I tell folks all the time that growing up there subjected me as a young woman to a lot of really harmful examples and so much hypocrisy. It's like growing up, you feel like you just see, half naked women everywhere. And I remember walking down the strip. My dad used to work at Circus, and that's where we would go a lot before he moved on to landscaping. But like that was one of the fun spots for kids that we would go to. And like when you think about it, you're like, this isn't really for kids. There was leaflets on the ground with, little stars on the women's nipples. And you're like, what is this? And so you just get like all these conflicting messages about what a woman is supposed to be for, right? If you choose to get into the sex related industry in Las Vegas, fantastic, good, let that be your choice, right? But there should be other influences, there should be other things that we're growing up seeing, educational opportunities, anything. It should be the entire spectrum of what's available to us as women, as opposed to just like, oh, this is what you do. You either become a stripper or you work in the casino or you do these things and that's it. Those are the only options for you. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of those industries and the folks that are working in them. But I think it's like people growing up, for me at least as a kid, like part of what happened to me and why I ended up getting involved in a lot of really negative things that were happening in my community was because I just didn't have the example of there being anything else. I didn't see it anywhere. Even late night TV, I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Erica, I'm probably showing my age now, but there used to be this guy in a referee and outfit, and he would be talking about the spreads because it was a late night sporting bet show. And then there was like another show where they would teach you how to play blackjack. And so I was like, okay, well, at least we're getting some math, but it was like, that's what I remember growing up with. And yeah, when I got into my teens, I certainly didn't think that there was anything else out there for me based on what I had grown up seeing.
And we are actually, when I pulled up your Wikipedia, we are actually the exact same age. And, but I didn't grow up in Vegas, but my children did. So when I moved there, I had already had all of the children that I have. And I looked around and it was so interesting to try to figure out how to make a childhood for my children, because there were just things that they couldn't do, like go outside and play in the summer because it's just too high, right?
Right.
And so, you have to kind of change your whole thinking of how you're raising your child there. And then also, it is the hot girls right now to your room, little flicker things that they have on the strip that the guys are just trying to hand you. And you're just like, I don't want that. And the rolling billboards, that are around. And it's so interesting because then there's also not comprehensive sex education in the schools.
Correct.
So, I've always said that Vegas is a very oxymoronic sort of town to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and it really requires a lot of intentional parenting. That's not to say that you can't raise a family and have them be well-rounded and, like live an otherwise pretty average compared to other families throughout other cities in America. That's not to say that that's not possible, but it really does require a lot of intentionality, a lot of energy, a lot of work. And I'm sure you can speak to this. You need a certain skill set for that, right? Like you need to understand how to talk to your kids about sex ed since they're not getting it in school, because again, like the hypocrisy of the state, right? You have legalized prostitution outside of the two largest counties in Nevada. And then within the counties where it's not legal, you have really this blatant sex industry, very explicit sex industry. And yet in school, so much of the curriculum is either not teaching our kids at all, or it's abstinence-based. And it's saying, well, don't pay any mind to the direct to your room women, but instead just choose to not have sex. That's going to be our our approach here, right? And so we know that these things don't work because we have skyrocketing teenage pregnancy rates, we have skyrocketing STD rates, et cetera, right? So the data tells us the truth about the reality of raising a family in Nevada. And it can be tough if you are not being very intentional and putting a lot of energy. But again, like I said, you don't get handed a manual when you have kids, and a lot of these parents are struggling because they also themselves don't have the education or, again, we know that if you don't have a parent that went to college, then your likelihood of going to college is significantly lower. So, we haven't done a good job of really breaking these generational cycles that come from not having education themselves and not having developed the skill sets. Look around. How many parenting classes do you see that are available in Las Vegas or anywhere in the state, right?
Yeah.
Like even if a parent wanted to be like, okay, how do I make myself better to be a better parent to my children? Like where there's no services for that, right? So that's what I say is that, I in my time in service there in Nevada, it was always about like, how do we provide things, resources, programming, et cetera, that are going to empower our communities, that are going to help lift them up. And even today, I say the same thing, right? Is like Nevada often breaks my heart so much because our people deserve better. They deserve better. And there are just not that many opportunities, even now, 10 years after my service, where they can find the resources that they need to help them be better parents, better people, better everything,
Right. So you mentioned your childhood, and you've talked about it on various platforms that, it was tough and you had some challenges. And could you talk to me a little bit about what happened and how you made it through?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, and I still tell people to this day that I've had to do quite a bit of therapy and self-development around getting over a certain amount of survivor's guilt that has really stayed with me my entire life. Like I'm 45 years old now, and I still struggle with survivor's guilt. And a lot of that came from, at the time when I was growing up in Vegas, I wasn't aware of data. I wasn't aware of statistics. I wasn't aware of policy. I wasn't aware of structural racism, structural misogyny. Like I wasn't aware of the systems and the way in which they are designed and how that harms people, how that harms children, how that harms kids in vitro, right? Like we now know that women who are pregnant and who are under extreme duress, their children are more likelier to suffer from mental health issues, from emotional development issues. Like we have science now that confirms what we know about generational trauma. And so growing up in Vegas, I was in Northeast Las Vegas. There was a lot of gang activity at the time, lots of drugs in the community. And I used to tell people all the time that there was more police officers than there were counselors, school counselors, right? And so despite me being a gifted and talented education, I fell through the cracks like so many kids do. And my mom had left my family, so I was having a lot of issues at home. And there was no intervention. There was absolutely no intervention that this smart kid, all of a sudden was failing every single advanced placement test, et cetera, right? Like nobody noticed. Frankly, it felt like nobody cared. Now in retrospect, I know that many people cared and there were many good teachers, but there is only so much a teacher can do. There is just complete overwhelm in a lot of our schools in low-income areas. And so fast forward, I did get involved in gangs. I started getting arrested, starting running away from home, doing all of these things. And it wasn't until years later, after I'd already been incarcerated and spent pretty much most of my young adult life incarcerated, either in detention in Clark County or in long-term institutions. One of them is Caliente. And so I had a parole officer, and I speak about her all the time. Leslie Williams, they think she's still in Nevada. I actually haven't connected with her in quite a couple of years, but we've stayed in touch my whole life. And she was really the first person who treated me like a kid with problems instead of just a bad kid. She treated me like an individual instead of just a number. And she, frankly, was the first person who I felt in my entire time going in and out of the system that tried to understand what was actually happening at home. And she had an opportunity to revoke my parole. I thought for sure that I was going to get sent back up, that I was going to just be in prison my whole life, just live the stereotypical outcome like teen mom or in gangs or dead or welfare, whatever, because that's what I'd always seen around me. And so when she chose not to revoke my parole, I tell people that really was like the first moment that as a young kid, at this point, we still had a shackling policy, which I'm really proud to say that I was a part of changing. When I was in the state legislature, we no longer shackle our kids. We no longer put them in shackles and orange jumpsuits and just to move them into a court setting, et cetera. And so at that time, that was a policy. And, it didn't matter if you were there for a curfew violation, you were still body shackled. You were still in an orange jumpsuit. You were still being subjected to that treatment as if you were, like a violent criminal. And so I really had resigned myself to what I thought was my future. And so when she suggested to the judge to not revoke my parole, that really was the first time that I felt like I maybe had a chance of something different. I didn't know what that was because I, again, didn't know enough. You don't know what you don't know. But I did know that someone finally believed in me. And so that was really the turning point. I really, as a 16-year-old kid, had to do what I possibly could within my own ideas of what was possible, and just not reoffend, and like try to stay out of trouble. And that was really, really, really hard. I basically subjected myself to at home incarceration, like confinement. Like I literally would not leave my house because I was afraid of getting caught up if I just walked down the street, And so that luckily I was a little older. I did drop out of high school. But then I was able to get what I thought was, a good job. I was working front office at a medical center and getting paid just above minimum wage. But to me, that was an upgrade, right? Like I wasn't, I wasn't doing fast food or anything like that. Like I felt like I was doing something that was a little more white collar, which was true. And from there, that really started the trajectory, and I got to say that all of it was because of mentorship. And the reason why I talk about survivor's guilt at first is because I did end up seeing people that were incarcerated with me as a kid, and they did not make it out. And I felt very much like I got very lucky in that I got this parole officer. I got the intervention that I finally needed from other mentors, like people who really took it upon themselves to help me, to help guide me, to inspire me, to always tell me that it was possible for me to accomplish more and that I was really smart and all these things. I mean, it took years of people telling me that I was capable of more before I actually believed it. I got my GED at 21 years old, right? Like I started my college career much later. And it was because, this didn't happen overnight. Like I had to have someone help change that framework, like my own brain, that something else was possible for my life. And so that's really where my life view comes from. It comes from that upbringing in Vegas and why I believe so strongly in interventionist policy changes and also, like I said, why I struggle with survivor's guilt, because there's so many other people who were just as smart as me, just as capable, just as everything, and they didn't get that mentorship. And if they did, maybe they didn't get it enough, right? Like everyone has a story about, oh, well, we did try to help this kid and they chose to do whatever. And so it can't be this blanket statement about everyone, every kid, every child, every human, every adult, depending on their situation, needs customized intervention. They need customized support. Some are going to need a little bit more than others. I needed probably like below average. I needed just a couple of folks to come in and remind me of what I was capable of, to teach me what I was capable of. So yeah, I still struggle to this day with recognizing that there's too many people being left behind. And to this day, I tell people all the time, the cure to cancer is in prison. There's Nobel Peace Prize winners in Caliente. We're losing so much talent. And the thing is that besides losing talent to this generational cycle that they're stuck in, is that also it shouldn't require above average talent. It shouldn't require being extraordinary to just live a decent life, because there's plenty of other people who didn't make it who would have just lived decent lives. And they were also robbed of those opportunities.
Something you said just now about customized intervention. I think that in this world, you'll see stories of people making it through. You've made it through, some other folks made it through, and folks love a good heroic story of how folks pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and they've come through the fire and all of that. And so then they'll lay that example out. It's like, well, they did it. Why can't all of these other folks do it? And I think that conversation around customized intervention really needs to be had as to like what folks need and what type of mentorship and hand-holding someone needs to get through whatever trauma has been a part of the reason why they behave the way they behave, or, what poverty has done for them. And it really made me think about the shackling. For anyone, it would be traumatic, but for a child to be shackled by the arms, by the legs, by the waist, or what have you, chained to a wall and all of that, what does that do to your psyche? And what does that do to your mental health? How does it break them down emotionally that it scars them for life? Like, I don't know if you remember what it felt like. Can you recall the feeling of being shackled and handcuffed and what you were feeling in that moment?
Yeah, of course. To your point, and to the point that I'm making of, I'm very guilty, I think, of playing up the raising yourself by bootstraps narrative that is a false narrative. I think we have to be very clear that that is not reality. There's no such thing as bootstraps. The American dream is a myth. And if you work hard and play by the rules and do everything that you're supposed to, you are not guaranteed a good outcome, not in this country. And maybe that was more true 50 years ago or 60 years ago, maybe even 40 years ago. It has not been true, frankly, since the Reagan administration and the hold of trickle-down economics. Nothing is trickling down to us. And so I just want to underscore that none of those things are based in reality. It is a myth that keeps people, frankly, believing that it's their fault. And many times it's not entirely their fault. Now, do we have choice? Do we have free will? Can we, if someone gives us an opportunity, do we have the choice to take it or not? Yes. But we also, what is important to this conversation is people have to remember that that person is not in the mindset that you are currently in. I think one of the biggest problems that this country has is that we are very quickly and disproportionately losing our ability to empathize. And empathy isn't the same as sympathy. Empathy is being able to understand what the other person is experiencing and what their experience might be outside of your own. And so when you think about what happens psychologically to a kid that has been raised around a bunch of harmful examples and culture, and in a community where there's more police officers, and not police officers being nice, they're policing you. They are looking at you like what are you doing wrong? The expectation is that you are doing something wrong, and they are there to stop you from doing that wrong thing, right? So when there's more police than there are school counselors, and you are then put into this system and subjected to that kind of dehumanizing treatment, that stays with you forever. And it isn't only until recently, and by recent I mean maybe like 10 years ago or so, that I could even talk about that experience without completely breaking down. In fact, like, I still, right now, as I speak to you, am using all of my tools and all of my strength to not break down again. That is just one moment, right, amongst many. And then you ask this kid, you take them out of that situation, in addition to the other traumas that they're experiencing at home. We have no idea what those might be. And then we say, hey, kid, we're going to give you a mentor, and we're going to show you the right way. We're going to give you these opportunities. Oh, and guess what? We're going to give you a scholarship. And then you just expect that kid to be okay. Right? You just expect that kid to wake up and be like, oh, yay, I have an opportunity. I'm going to take advantage of it. I'm going to use my free will and take advantage of this incredible opportunity, right? When you break it down that way, it is absolutely ludicrous. It is ludicrous. And that is what I try to get people to understand. And what we all need to understand is that those kinds of experiences scar people for life. And it is our job, it is our duty. First off, it's our duty to mitigate that, right? That shouldn't be happening, period, right? Mm-hmm. Like, prevention is worth, or what is the an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That is something that the United States, and I say this as a whole, like, we do not believe in that. We do not exercise that, right? We've known for so many years that incarceration is more expensive than education. We know this. We know exactly what to do to prevent these kinds of things from happening.
But it's a business.
To our kids.
It's an entire business.
It's a business
that produces revenue.
Correct. So. It's a business. Our elected leaders are completely under now post Citizens United. Our politics are completely overwhelmed with money. We have too few people who are willing to lose their seats in order to do the right thing. Like, we have situations of democratic majorities, and the only thing that they're doing is working to keep those majorities, not to actually do anything meaningful with those voting blocks, with those majorities. And so, it's just like this whole system is so much harder even now than it was back then, because we don't have enough people who are willing to do the hard things, tax the right people, right? Tax the corporations that should be taxed, et cetera, and stand up to the bullying that's happening, in order for us to put the right policies in place and to do the right investments in places that need them. And we're not just talking about young people, right? We're talking about young adults. We're talking about adults. The drug crisis, for example, there's a lot of emphasis on trafficking that's coming in from Mexico. And yet, where is the conversation about what the U.S. is doing to address the users of those drugs, right? Like, what are we doing to address addiction and everything that not only comes with it, but that leads to it? Again, like, you see all kinds of programs now for methadone and, various things to
opioid treatment centers.
And also what's the thing that they're now, health departments are dispersing Narcan. And, when I look at these programs and I think to myself, my God, we don't learn. we don't learn. So we're going to do this mass distribution of Narcan so that when someone is ODing in front of us, we can do something to save their life. But we're not going to talk about why they're ODing to begin with. Right? We're not going to do a mass intervention in drug addiction treatment. We're not going to do anything about the fact that they became addicts, but we're going to do a mass distribution of Narcan. Like, that makes no sense. None of these things make any sense. So yeah, going back to your original point about the long-lasting trauma, we are producing, and by we, I mean the United States, including Nevada, we are producing generations of traumatized Americans. And I have no idea how we come back from that without some very, very serious interventions.
Something you just said about, we don't get to the root of the problems, right? And so as someone who has served in the legislature in Nevada and then also had aspirations for higher office, why is it so difficult to enact policies that actually start at the root and aren't as ceremonial and, let's just have a study. Let's just pluck at the top of the tree and pluck off the yellow leaves, but we don't get to where the root rot is. Why is that so difficult?
I think it's two things. One is because it usually does require an investment. It does require funding of various programs. And the second part of that then is, where does that money come from? And so it was always a conversation of funding and where does it come from? And if we fund this particular program, then what's going to get cut? No, it's not. It's not a rob Peter to pay Paul situation, right? And the tough conversations have always been around, there's always the saying, show me your budget and you'll show me your values. And that continues to be the case in not just Nevada, but in states throughout the country. And sometimes you get, and oftentimes this isn't partisan. You look at California, and California is in a world of trouble, and they're primarily Democratic leadership there, right? You look at the crisis in homelessness that's happening in LA County, constantly led by Democrats. And so it really is more of a conversation that speaks to courageous leadership, to the wealth divide and the class issue that is happening in this country, and the fact that money has an overwhelming grip. And those who have the money have an overwhelming grip on our democratic process. And that includes Democrats and it includes Republicans. So the reason why the root of the problem isn't addressed is because, frankly, we don't have enough effective and courageous leadership that is willing to not only invest in these types of programs, but to do so against what might be bad press around it. And I'll give you one example. The Fight for 15, when the minimum wage, when there were statewide campaigns to get $15 as the minimum wage in many municipalities, where we're talking about the federal minimum wage has not been changed in, I think, like 15 years. It's still $7.25 or something like that. It's obviously a minuscule number that does absolutely nothing for anyone. Most states, though, have their state minimum wage. And I remember I was in the legislature when that was happening. And all of industry, the retailers, the everybody, they were like, if you raise the minimum wage, we're gonna lose jobs. We're gonna have to pass the cost on to consumers. It's gonna raise prices, right? The Seattle City Council had the courage to be one of the first local municipalities to create a $15 minimum wage in their city. 6 months later and a year later, we were able to have some actual data from it. Did costs rise? No. Did the price of a product in Seattle cost more than the price of a product in Vegas? No. Had it changed from 6 months into a year prior? No, right? Like, they're always crying wolf and holding entire cities, and by they, I mean corporations, and holding them by the neck, alleging that there will be layoffs. And of course, nobody wants a layoff, right? No one wants to lose their job. Right. And as elected officials, we want to ensure that we keep the economy strong. So they finally did it in Seattle. Lo and behold, nothing changed. And so what happened? other people started getting emboldened by that. And then all of a sudden you saw 15 minimum wage making it across the country. That's the one of the perfect examples of how if you just do what you know is right, what you were elected to do. And is there going to be fallout sometimes? Sure. Yeah, you might lose your position. I mean, I certainly did. But that doesn't mean that others aren't going to remain and that can continue that fight. It just might take a little bit longer than we had hoped for. But that's the biggest problem to me. There just isn't enough people willing to be courageous. And like I said at the very beginning, willing to lose their elected seats.
So thinking about the state of the world today, the state of our country, what issues are keeping you up at night? What's the top line worry for you?
Oh my God.
I mean, there's a laundry list, right?
I know. Oh my gosh, it's definitely long. Climate change is definitely a big one. Look at what just happened in LA. And people are like, oh, it's a disaster. That was a man-made disaster. It could have been avoided. Wildfires have occurred in California for decades and decades and decades. They know that. There's mitigating efforts that are done in order to reduce how bad those will be. But there is absolutely nothing that could have been done to prevent or to prepare for the extreme Santa Ana winds that occurred, plus the extreme dry conditions from their extended drought, right? Put all of these things together and you've got one horrific outcome. All of those things were results of a climate change that have happened over the course of years and years and years. And scientists have told us time and time again, they warned us this is what's going to happen. And now it's happening even sooner than they initially warned us about. And the big thing about climate change is that it is coming from the biggest offenders. It's coming from the multi-millionaires and billionaires, the shareholders, these corporations that are the ones that are spending millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying, in getting presidents elected, in keeping certain people in power, whether it's Democrat or Republican, right? Like we are on the precipice, if not already, by book definition, in an oligarchy. We are no longer in a democracy. And so things like that, they keep me up at night because I realize that they're systemic, right? And that if we don't change our system, if we don't come together, if the people don't realize that it's us who have the power and not these billionaires, that we are on the precipice of devastation. It's not just the US. It's not, our democracy is certainly at risk. We have so many examples, historical examples, to point to. And so it is not impossible that our freedoms that we are so used to having can be taken away from us in the course of the next couple of years. Those existential threats are what keep me up at night. But the reason why they keep me up at night is because my policy brain understands what got us there. And if we don't rise up as people, and by rise up, I mean rise up, if we don't exercise out the power of our wallets, if we don't withhold as a group, I mean as everybody, right? As humans, as Americans, if we don't come together now in this moment and collectively stand up against these billionaires and these corporations through mass boycotts, through refusal to work in some instances. And I don't mean day of actions because I don't believe that those things are effective. But, when we think about the fact that the United States now has this anti-immigrant mindset and they're like, oh, well, we only want to deport the criminals. That's not what's happening. So imagine that every single undocumented immigrant in this country is deported. It isn't even about reducing them to their labor. It's that they are I can't think of the word. Integral. It's integral part of our system, our ecosystem. It's not just about their work. They spend money in communities. They're a part of making. We all do. We're a part of making. If they don't have us as users, as consumers, what do they have? Right. So I hope that wasn't too big of a tangent, but I hope that people recognize that is the very real threats that we are under right now as Americans.
You mentioned days of action and not thinking that they work. Talk to me more about that, because I think there's one coming up soon, and folks have been boycotting against companies, Target, Walmart, and the such for rollback of DEI, amongst other things. Do you think that that doesn't work, or that there's a better way to rise up and actually see something change?
It works if it is systemic and it is sustained. Imagine if every single person of color who shops at Target stopped, not just for one day, but for 6 months. What do you think that their reaction would be? They don't care about your feelings, about diversity, about the morality of anything. They care about money. We live in a capitalistic system, and we have to stop deluding ourselves that I don't know if we can cuss here, but they do not give a, you know what, about any of us. They exist because we give them money. So when people do a day of action, it's not, and you can look at history with this, right? I mean, all of this is based on what's been effective in the past and what hasn't. When you look at the bus boycotts, for example, and the very, very effective economic boycotts, the Great Boycott in California, those things were all effective because people stood together. And even when it was hard, they refused to participate. So you had folks that would walk miles instead of taking the bus, right? And it was widespread and it was in solidarity. If we could do that again, I'm telling you that these folks would change their policies within weeks. But it has to be sustained and it has to be widespread. So while I encourage days of action as maybe like a way to bring awareness for people to participate in very clear, very as easy as we can make it. Because, unfortunately nowadays, like people, it's like, well, okay, fine, I'll do it if it's easy. And like, okay, fine, let's try to make this as easy as possible. But, as easy as possible and also in sustained ways, then yes, we can 100% be impactful. So I do believe that some of the DEI boycotts could be effective, but it really has to be strategic, right? So if you're going to target the top 3 offenders, if you will, that are the most widespread, and enough people say, okay, I am no longer going to shop Target. And if I do shop Target, it's only going to be for people of color owned brands. Right. They actually do have quite a few designers and wellness, like beauty and things. So if all you ever do is go in there and just get your hair care product from a person of color brand, I think that sends the same message. But if you just, the better part, because again, you have to like, how do we not impact people of color owned brands? Right. But the better part is that if there's like another corporation that's on the list, that you boycott them entirely, and that there are 64 million Latinos in this country. There are, I think, 20 to 30 million African Americans. There are, I don't even know the number of the rest, I don't know how many Asian Americans, et cetera. I don't know the numbers, but think of if like 100 million people stopped shopping a particular brand, even for a month, that would devastate their bottom line, right? Imagine if we all stopped shopping at Starbucks. And I don't know that Starbucks is on the list, but so I think I've given enough examples. That's part of the reason why refraining from doing something for one day does absolutely, they don't care. They're like, okay, great. They'll come back tomorrow. There's whatever they need, they're just going to get the next day, right? Like, so it doesn't make a difference.
And I also think like it's not to then go from one big box store to another big box store, right? That doesn't actually move the needle the way it needs to. We also need to think about like, how can we shop smaller and be more intentional in that way? And it takes a lot of work, right? So thinking about, the extra effort that we have to put into it. and realizing that sometimes things are going to be inconvenient, but I mean, if movements are inconvenient,
That's
like
right.
that's a part of it. Thinking about something else you said, we live in a capitalistic society, obviously, and we put these billionaires on pedestals. And as much as there's still a movement around tax the rich and all of that, there's still enough of this awe around, how people are billionaires and they make so much money and people want to be like that. They want to emulate that. And I wonder if that is also a part of the struggle of us breaking down these systems, is because we still look at it as something to aspire to.
Yeah, absolutely. Consumerism, ever since, again, the 80s really did a number on us. When all of a sudden you had shows like The Rich and Famous. I don't remember the name of that
Lifestyles
show.
of
Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
with
Yeah.
Robin Leach.
That's right. That was right. That was basically like the first iteration of developing wealth envy. And now that's all across social media, right? Again, because we're in this capitalistic society, and it's based on materialism. People just want things. They want the latest brand, they want the latest whatever, because that's what's cool. And so now we have moved on from Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous to the Kardashians, which also has inspired body dysmorphia. And that's a whole other thing, right? So it's like we have all these issues that are happening. But bottom line is, why? Because people are constantly aspiring to be like these other people, whether it's a billionaire or whether it's this, no wrinkle on your face, which, by the way, that is not natural, right? Like all humans are supposed to get wrinkled at some point, right? And if you don't, then that looks actually really unnatural. So again, it's like this aspirational culture that we have created really sets the stage for lots of people to believe. And also because of the myth of the American dream and the bootstraps, like all these myths, all these narratives, all of these things that are not based on reality get into the mindset and frankly, like the self-identity of the person. And it's really hard to disrupt that. It's really hard for them to be like, oh, wait, I don't need this Louis bag, or, whatever is the latest thing that's out there. I don't also holy cow, I'm never actually going to be a billionaire. Like, they have not studied the backstories of these billionaires enough. I have, because I'm obsessed with, again, understanding systemic oppression and systemic elevation. And the vast majorities, quote unquote, self-made billionaires are not self-made at all. They are beneficiaries of generational wealth. They are beneficiaries of policies that are made for them. For example, tax policies, right? Like, how do you feel knowing that you in your paycheck are paying anywhere between 18 to 25% because your money is made from your labor, called wages? How do you feel knowing that you have to pay that, yet a billionaire whose wealth is generated from other money, right? Their money is making money. They're not laboring. They're not directing. They're not producing anything, right? Like, their money is making money. And so therefore that money gets taxed at a significantly lesser rate than your money. What in your mind makes that okay? How are they smarter than you just because they inherited a bunch of money, or because they inherited a property that they were then able to sell? The list goes on and on and on and on. The more people realize that, the more they learn that, I think the more that it's going to start to break that myth of the billionaire, that putting them on a pedestal and believing that they're better than us, that they somehow deserve that amount of money because they are leading this corporation and therefore they must have this skill set that is significantly better than the rest of us. None of that is true. None of it. And so I believe our job is to continue to try to dismantle those false narratives in order for people to understand the truth. And I think that that's ultimately how we get past this. because it's just what people believe. And sometimes that deep-seated belief is going to be so deeply seated in them that they're never, ever going to change. And that's unfortunate, but that doesn't mean that we give up on the rest. There are some folks that are just so entirely brainwashed by the narrative of the right. And oftentimes, again, it's not even the narrative of the right, as in Republicans, it's the narrative of the extremely wealthy that are pushing these narratives in order for everyone else to continue to be consumers, because that's what they need them to be. They need them to be consumers. They need them to be obsessed with materialism, and they need them to be busy. They need them to be exhausted. They need them to be confused. They need them to be uneducated. They need them to be worker bees who are going to get up every day, worry about existing, and strive to purchase that thing that they want, that everybody else has, and get up and do it every single day, every day after, for the rest of their lives. That's the kind of person that they need.
Do you think that explains the uptick of the Latino vote for Trump?
So that has actually been a long time coming. I will say that the Republicans, specifically Republicans, have done significantly more outreach, sustained outreach into the Latino community for over a decade. They have funded things like the Libre Initiative. They have funded upstart comms channels like Prager University. They have funded, without question, I don't need a report. Here you go. Just go do it. Whereas the left doesn't work that way. They're like, oh, we can't fund your operations. Just do this program and then give us a 20-page report afterwards. The right funds community intervention significantly different than the left does. And they started doing that with the Latino community years and years ago. And I remember being in the state legislature, talking to folks at the DNC, talking to folks at the D-Trip, talking to folks everywhere, anyone who would listen to me. We're talking about the executive directors, we're talking about the leaders, and saying, look what they're doing. Look how they are investing in communicating with the Latino community. And when I say communicating, oftentimes it was through misinformation and disinformation, and sometimes all out lies, and sometimes misrepresentations, right? So you would see the Libre Initiative doing a taller, a workshop on immigration, at the same time that the Republicans were literally dismantling immigration and increasing deportations and making it harder to become a citizen. So this whole time, the right are doing these absolutely terrible things to Latinos, while at the same time, organizations like the Libre Initiative are saying, hey, come, we're going to help you with your immigration for free. Oh, by the way, we're also going to talk to you about family values. And we're also going to talk to you about anti-communism. And we're going to talk to you about all of these falsehoods that exist, and literally begin to brainwash people. They would constantly do this switch and bait situation where they would bring them in with something that was community-based and then talk to them about these lies, these all-out lies, and say, we're the better choice for you. We care about your family. We are the party of family values. We are the party of hard workers. We're the party of bootstraps. We're the party of this, the party of that, the party of that. And do this systemically and consistently for 15 years, 20 years, and that's what you get, Erika. This is what we get. So yes, 100%. And then the rise, of course, mis and disinformation, both in English and in Spanish language, particularly the rise in Spanish language mis and disinformation amongst places like radio. Only 4% of the Latino community gets their news and information content from radio, but 4% is enough to change the outcome of an election. And that's why they were so smart about it. They didn't need to convince the majority of Latinos to vote for them. They only needed the margins. And that is so smart. It is so smart. You only need to convince 2% in this state, 5% in that state, 10% in this state, et cetera. They only needed a few. And that is exactly what they got. It took them about 15 to 20 years or so and 10 years of intensity for them to get it, but they got it. And that is why they are so successful at what they do, because they play the long game. We do not. They did it with abortion. They did it with education. They did it with Latinos. They're starting to even peel away at the margins of the Black community. You saw more Black men vote Trump than you ever did before, or vote Republican. Like, you're starting to see the margins, and this is their payoff. It pains me to say it, but you've got to give credit where credit's due. They got what they invested in, and we did not. And by we, I don't mean you or me and all of our colleagues that are on the front lines and, working to mobilize our communities. We know this, and we've been aware of this for a very long time, but we're not the people who make the funding decisions. We're not the ones that are making policy decisions. We're not leading caucuses. We're not leading donor tables. We're not making those decisions. And because of that, this is where we are.
I have so many thoughts about leadership and what sometimes folks' true motivations are, because I have spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how do we get folks to tackle this long game? Because I agree with you. They have had a long game that they have implemented in a lot of different places, including now it's a school board, right? And so
Correct.
the school boards all across the country have been infiltrated by the quote unquote right, or what have you, or folks with these values that trying to move away from having quality public schools.
Correct.
And I have said for a number of years that no one offers grant funding for us to specifically work on school board races or work with school board trustees to change the trajectory, right? And even though it's common knowledge now that that's where people are really trying to make change in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get those in power to see, or can we get those in power to see, or do we wipe it all out and not think about the top leaders of the parties and the top leaders of whomever and try to wave our hands and get them to change their minds and to think differently? I guess the question is, how do we get real movement happening where we're not so dependent on those who've been in charge to change their mind or change their direction, because it doesn't feel like they care?
They don't. And I believe that the only way in which we're going to fundamentally change these systems are by changing leadership. And so I do believe that more primaries need to be funded. And look, again, it's not like I'm a genius and I'm just like coming up with a bunch of ideas. Like, literally, if you look at the rise of the extreme right, that's how they did it. They started funding Tea Partiers. This is back when it was the Tea Party. And they started challenging moderate Republicans. I tell folks all the time that I actually served at a time where I could work with my colleagues, with my Republican colleagues. When I ran for Congress, we did an analysis of voting track records. And out of bills introduced and bills actually passed and signed by a governor into law, I was the legislator with the most successful track record. And so I was able to do that because I could work with my Republican colleagues. I worked with Governor Sandoval at the time's office, right? And we were able to come to some common sense solutions. And like, I worked on some pretty controversial stuff, right? Like, I was working on VAWA and making that state-based so that women and people that were in domestic violence situations could now get out of their lease without penalty so that they could leave their abuser. And the real estate association and the rental folks and all those, like, everybody was against it. But I was able to get my Republican colleagues to understand what was happening, to have all kinds of additional validators on that list, right? Because they wanted just the police. And we know that victims of domestic violence, that's the last place they're going for help, right? But they will tell a pastor, they will tell a social worker, and, a number of other measures that I was able to get passed under Republican leadership. And I was able to do that because there was still moderate Republicans to work with. And that's just not the case anymore. There's fewer and fewer moderate Republicans. And frankly, there's fewer and fewer, I would say, common sense Democrats. right? Like, yes, I am very liberal, and to the point where I consider myself a democratic socialist, but we live in a capitalistic system. And so we have to develop policies that work within the system that we have. And so that does mean having to be reasonable about the various policies that we're proposing. And so, like, this whole concept of reasonableness just isn't very present in our politics anymore. And so, again, unless we get the kind of courageous leadership that is willing, I mean, look, that's part of the reason why I endorsed Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton years ago, and why they, in response to that, millions and millions of dollars were poured into my congressional primary at the time in order to defeat me, right? Like, Bill Clinton literally came to Nevada, put himself in commercials, right, for my opponent, because I had the audacity to endorse, in a very public and very viral and very effective way, Bernie Sanders, right? And so in politics, you will get punished if you do not stay in line. And I was very much punished, but I would do it again, over and over and over again. I would do the exact same things that I did. And the reason why is because that is what we need to encourage. We need to encourage that kind of courageous leadership of the folks that are currently there. As far as money is concerned, I don't give to the Democratic Party. I'm a member of the Democratic Party, but I do not give them not a single dime. I give money to organizations that are on the ground, that are working to uplift local leadership, that are working to address systematic leadership issues. Like, that's where I send my money, and that's where we need to continue to invest. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting different results, right? Like, why would we think at this point that our leadership is going to do absolutely anything different to get us out of this crisis? It's just not going to happen. So yes, we need to change leadership, and we need to change the way that things are funded. And I just, as many people that can say this out loud and that can continue to move the movement forward in that way, the more likely that we are going to be to actually, I mean, look, just the other day, Bernie, he warned us all about this, by the way. His thing has been class inequality for a very long time. Again, based on data, based on research. We've seen this in the history books. It's not like any of us are so smart that we predicted this. No, it's because history repeats itself. Like, we know what's going to happen. And here we are. And so now Bernie has been holding town halls across the country. And what do you think is happening at those town halls?
Oh, he's getting so many people, like, and they're going into the overflow rooms.
Yes, yes.
The groundswell is amazing.
It is like, literally the enormity of the people that are once again being inspired to stand up against the oligarchy. But we have to really think, it's not just the billionaires. It is the people that they have enabled and who are doing their bidding. And that includes both Republican and Democratic leadership. And it does include internal movement leaders as well. And this is the sausage that the everyday person doesn't know about. And frankly, I think it's because too many of us are unwilling to talk about it, right? This isn't dirty laundry. This isn't airing dirty laundry. This is accountability, and it is talking about strategies and ways in which we can, as individuals, become a part of something to produce different results. And that does mean that those leaders, particularly the Democratic ones, who have been there for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever, they have to go. They got to go. And there is no other alternative. There is no other solution. These people are not going to all of a sudden wake up and be like, oh, I got a backbone today. I'm going to stand up for my community. It's just not going to happen.
I've been taking my calcium pills. So tell me how you and why you decided to pivot from being an elected official, being in public office, to co-founding a communications firm?
Yeah, so we are a digital media publisher. Loose Media is a publisher. We're not a comms firm. And I know it's like hard to explain because Latino media doesn't really exist. And so it's hard to show examples. But think of Teen Vogue, think of Blavity, think of
Condé Nast.
Condé Nast, yeah, exactly. They're all publishers. They're all digital publishers. And so that's what we do. We produce news and information content and lifestyle content at loosemedia.co, and it is entirely centered around US-based English dominant Latinas. And it is about producing this information from a Latino point of view. How is what is happening in this community affecting Latinos? And what are the considerations that need to be taken when telling these stories, right? Because we all know that there is no such thing as telling a story without bias. And so how do you have journalistic integrity and tell fact-based stories in a way that does service to the entire story and the community in which it's about? That's it. And mass media simply does not do that. And that's because mass media, mainstream media, is dominated by corporations. Again, they just care about their bottom line. So if they produce a headline that is very clickbaity or misleading, and it's like the invasion at the border, there's no invasion at the border. But they're going to say that, they're going to repeat those words because they're inflammatory, because they lead to clicks. And then what does that do? That changes people's mindset entirely. So when I left politics, and the reason why I left, Erika, is because, frankly, I just didn't have anything left in me to give. When I was in service in Nevada, that was my number one everything. I wanted to do the best job possible and have the most impact possible while doing my work. And that included if I was running for office. I never ran for office with the idea that I wasn't in it to try to win. It wasn't a stepping stone. It wasn't, like when I ran for lieutenant governor, it's because I had some very real, very, I believe, good ideas of how to make that office more effective. And if I had won for lieutenant governor, I believe that I would have been probably one of the best lieutenant governors ever in the state of Nevada. Same for Congress, right? If I had won for Congress, I truly believe that I would have done one of, if not the best job ever as a congresswoman for District 4 that district has ever seen, because that is how committed I was to my community and to trying to do good by the people who voted for me and by the people who didn't vote for me. But that wasn't in the cards for me. So when I left, I just didn't have, it's like saying I left it all on the field, right? And I did. I left every ounce of me on the field. And it took me over a year to really recover from my experience in politics in Nevada. But as soon as I did that, I moved on to communications, to media, because in that process, I had also learned and discovered how powerful narrative is, how powerful stories are, and not just the ones that, like not just the advertising, because of course the advertising is powerful as well, but that day-to-day stuff that you're getting, right? The news headlines, the stories you're reading, the things that you talk about with your friends over coffee. Like, did you see that thing? Did you read this thing? Right? Like, those are the things that ultimately can turn lies into beliefs. And that is something that we have seen play out in mass media narrative time and time and time again, to the point where propaganda is created from narrative, right? That's one of the reasons why dictators, one of the first things that they do is they attack the free press. Why? Because they have to control what the people are hearing. So that's what we're seeing now, right? We're seeing these attacks on free press. Now, when I joined Me Too as the Vice President of Public Affairs, my job was to develop social impact content and strategies around that content. And my entire goal was, how do I produce content, whether at that time it was like pop culture content and things like that, that are really dismantling stereotypes about Latinos, that are underscoring truth, that are getting beyond the misinformation and the stereotypes that exist about Latinos. One of the biggest reasons why Latinos, particularly Mexican American immigrants and the undocumented, are so vulnerable to anti-immigrant rhetoric is because too many people only know the stereotypes about them. That's all they know. They believe that they're drug dealers. They believe that they're criminals. They believe that they only come here to do their worst. They believe all these things that they hear. Why? Because they don't see any counter narratives about them. They don't see how they're everyday Americans like everybody else, right? In all aspects of life, right? They don't see that part. And so that's part of the reason why I decided to continue on after Me Too. They had a corporate takeover and some other things happened with leadership there. I left and launched Loose Media. And I said, if I'm going to focus on an audience, I'm going to do it on women, because women are always the ones that are, one, doing the heavy lifting and keeping the brands going. And yet we're the ones that are always deprioritized when it comes to being centered in the stories. So that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And from there, I also launched the Latino Media Consortium, which is now essentially a collective of independent Latino media publishers, lots of them local, some national, like Conecta Arizona in Phoenix is a member, El Tecolote in San Francisco is a member, the Latino Newsletter is a member, Pulso out of Miami is a member. And the idea was that because too little is known about independent Latino media, that it was an organizing approach, right? It was like, okay, where is our power? Our power is in numbers. So we have to come together as independent publishers and make our presence known and advocate for ourselves and advocate for funding and advocate for policies and all these things that are going to help empower independent Latino media, because that is the only solution to these narratives that exist, that harm, that do so much harm, and so that America understands the nuance and the breadth and the beauty of the Latino community, the breadth of our racial makeup, right? So many people are like so mind boggled, and they fight about it, where they're like, Cardi B, for example, like she's either Black or she's Latina. She can't be both. No, actually, that's by definition what she is. She's both, right? She's Black and she's Latina, she's Dominican. And so, but people are like, no, like you either be Black or you be Latina. And you're like, no, she's, so it's like, it's little things like that. That's not very little, right? Like you have to understand that Latinos are all races, including white. And white Latinos have a lot of privilege and other stature. There's colorism in the Latino community. Like there's so many things that people don't know about us. And so it's our job to make sure that those stories are told, because that is the way in which we get to understanding. It's the way in we get to empowerment. It's the way that we get to fairness and equity and all of the things that we hold dear as Americans.
Yeah, I think that's how we divide, right? You other somebody in some sort of way, and then you don't belong to said community. And then if they feel alienated, then that is a part of that, how folks end up in these situations where they vote against their best interests or the interests of their community.
Correct. Which, by the way, I just want to note really quickly that I don't like that. I don't like that term. I don't like saying voting against your best interests, because a lot of those folks believe that they are voting in their best interests. And it's because of narratives and brainwashing and intervention and all of these things that they have done. And so I think that sometimes for us, we say that, but it's really belittling. And I'm not saying that you're doing it on purpose or anything like that, but I just want to say that because I think that we very much get used to being like, it embodies, well, it underscores our non-understanding, again, our empathy, right? Yes, people are voting in ways that ultimately aren't going to pan out the way that they think it is, but it's not because they're stupid, and it's not because they are uneducated or whatever. It's just because there's been all of these external forces that have forced them, that have convinced them to believe that they actually are voting in their best interest. And I'm not saying this is everybody. Like some people are just racist and they're voting because or they're misogynist or whatever, right? But a lot of people who we say are not voting in their best interests, they are voting in their best interests. It's our job to try to help them understand, correct all of these narratives that are in their head, their beliefs about what the reality is. And that's a much harder lift, right? Like it is a much harder lift than to convince
Yeah.
you, hey, your vote is actually hurting you, you know?
Yeah.
So I just wanted
And
to
I
say
think,
that.
oh no, I think that's important. And I think that in that way, it's, for some people, I think it is meant to sound belittling or that someone is not smart. And I don't think of it in that way. I think of it in a way of not voting in the best interest of the whole and not just the individual. And something
Right.
I've said multiple times on the show is that I really want to move away from that one vote, one voice thing, because we're not
Yes.
voting for just ourselves. We're voting for our
Correct.
entire community. And so in that sense, a lot of times we're not thinking about the long term or the unintended consequences of what it means to vote on something or for someone and not seeing the bigger picture. And
Yeah,
so in
that's a
that
really
way,
good
I feel
point.
like we will vote against our best interest because we like how someone spoke or we
Right.
like how they looked or they dressed well or whatever it is. Stuff that doesn't matter. Can I have a beer with them? You're probably not ever going to have a beer with them, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, I agree.
But before we go, I appreciate this conversation so much. And I knew it was going to be great. And I knew you're just fabulous. And just remembering how much effort you put into your elections. And as a caveat, I did make phone calls for you and my kids made signs and
Yeah,
all
I
of that.
remember.
And it was fun. And it was a fun way for them to understand a little bit about what elections are. And the bigger picture is that, that we have to get out and support our community if we want the best version of our community to rise up. And so I'm grateful that we were able to do it regardless. I want to ask you, you talked a little bit about the American dream and what it's not for you. And it's a question I ask most folks. What is your version of the American dream?
My version of the American dream, I think, is the version that was sold to us. I think my version of the American dream is the actual living of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and what our forefathers talked about. And notice I didn't say what they intended. Because let's be clear, right? Like
we didn't matter.
Correct. Correct. Women did not matter. Black people did not matter. Indigenous people didn't matter. So it's a distinction that's why book bans, that's why rewriting history, that's why talking about and demonizing diversity and inclusion, Chicano studies, Black history, et cetera. That's why all of this is being attacked, because the truth is inconvenient. They don't want people to know the truth. They don't want people to understand the actual history of the founding of this country. And it's not white shaming. It's not white guilt. It's none of that. It is acknowledgement of the reality of how this country was founded and how that then has turned into systems that are oppressive to some and helpful to others. That's it. We're not asking anyone to feel guilty about anything. We're simply saying, let's recognize that systems are not actually living up to these ideals that were espoused. Now, I think that the Founding Fathers made a huge mistake because they actually were too general in these ideals that they espoused, because they were only thinking about themselves, and yet they used words that included everybody. So we're like, ooh, okay, you done messed up, sir. So now it's like, and equality and justice for all, right? When I say the Pledge of Allegiance, I mean the Pledge of Allegiance, but most people don't. Like equality and justice, or for justice for all. Justice for all is justice for all. It's pretty simple, right? But not everybody gets justice, and not everyone has equality, and not everyone has equal rights. We're still trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment somehow recognized in order to actually get equal rights for women in the Constitution. So,
This is over a 50-year fight.
Correct. Yeah. So when I think about what is the American dream and what I want for this country, I want us to be able to actually live up to the ideal that was presented to us. not what was happening at the time, but the ideal. And I think it's a beautiful ideal. Like where we could have a country where in reality, if you work hard and you follow the laws and you educate yourself and you do these things, if you work, then you will be able to live a decent life. And if you work even harder or you're naturally gifted at certain things, just like if you're naturally gifted at sports or if you're naturally gifted at music or whatever, if you're naturally gifted and you're able to excel even further, or you just work that much harder and you're able to excel further, then fantastic, then be rewarded for that. Like, this is not a meritocracy. This country has never been a meritocracy. And that's another thing that people need to recognize. This is not merit-based, right? People are mad about affirmative action and DEI, and they're like, it's not based on merit. No, you're correct. It's never been based on merit. The best candidate has not always been chosen. And again, we know this because of data and research and studies that tell us that if you have an African-American name or a Latino-sounding name, despite having the exact same qualifications on identical resumes, guess who was picked first by the recruiter? The white sounding name, right? This is not about merit. So people need to get merit out of their head. That's not a thing. I would love for this country to actually be based on merit, for success to be based on merit, and for everyone to truly have the same opportunity to live out their lives based on their God-given talents. Like, that's it. And it almost feels like literally just using all of the words from our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And it almost sounds like this ideal, like this fictional place that is never, ever going to happen. Like, we're never, ever, but that's literally what our founding documents say we're supposed to have. So think about it. If our founding documents all say that we're a more perfect union, that we are always striving towards a more perfect union, then we should do that, right? Like, this isn't some place that is unreachable. It is reachable if, again, as a community, we can come together, we can put those in power who believe in moving forward these ideals and can truly get us to be a country where if you work hard and you play by the rules and you be a good human, then you can live a decent life. That's what I want.
I think that's a beautiful sentiment and a great way to end. I just want to say thank you once again for joining me on Sticky Note Conversations. It's really good to see you. I don't get to see you as often unless we run into each other in random places around the country, but I'm glad to know that you are continuing the fight and that you are spreading the knowledge on what really needs to happen for us to get towards that version of the American dream, whatever it is for each of us as individuals, but also that you're uplifting messaging that will resonate with the communities across the country, all types of Latino communities. So I want to say thank you. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you stay so positive and whatever keeps you going. Besides Soul Cycle, which I should also have put in the beginning, is that they should be paying you by now because you are the reason I have a Soul Cycle bike in the first place.
They really should.
They really should.
I hope this travels. I hope this thing goes viral and that somehow it ends up on some executive's podcast list. And then I'm like, guess what happened, Erika?
Right. And also added to my life, I'm also a Soul Cycle representative. So, the bike has helped keep me sane. I will say. It
does. I'm telling you, there is no place like it. The best humans. And this is, the corporation has changed a lot, but the humans have not. And, just everyone needs an outlet. I do very much advocate for folks needing an outlet, like a physical outlet. And of course, like trying to stay as healthy as possible. But Soul Cycle is definitely one of the reasons why I am as positive and as sane as I can be, given all of this.
Yeah, we need the outlet to somewhere to jump up and down. And
That's right. Yes, because sometimes that's all we got. We have nothing else. That's all we got.
That is so true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lucy. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
All right, y'all. That's another episode of Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. I will see you all next week.
for listening to Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington, hosted and executively produced by Erika Washington, with editing by Black Gypsy LLC and Simone Endres. Special thanks to KUNV 91.5 in Las Vegas. This show is powered by Make It Work Nevada, a project of Tides Advocacy. And a special thank you to Grove GT Teague and Eno Savad, who made our new theme song, Way Below Acceptable.